Hi everybody, it's Sam from Oval Renewables and I'm going to give you a walkthrough on our latest project here in York. This solar PV system that we've installed is made up of 18 340 watt Trina solar panels, and that's wired into a 5 kilowatt single phase SolarEdge inverter. Anyone that follows us knows how much we love the SolarEdge system, and this is the perfect one to show you. This system's made up not only of the SolarEdge inverter, but it's also got a SolarEdge Energy Modbus, which shows this customer and ourselves and SolarEdge, if needs be, what the home is importing, exporting and self-consuming of the solar PV that they're generating, which will help us and the customer make an assessment in the future as to if a battery storage system is even worth getting. So like I mentioned, this system has 18 340 watt solar PV panels installed, but we've only got a 5 kilowatt inverter. So 18 340 watt panels is around 6.1 kilowatts of solar PV DC installed power on the roof. That is a great amount of power, and we have literally filled this roof with solar. Now, one of the key things with SolarEdge is that we've got up to a 55% DC oversizing available on the inverter. Like I've mentioned, we've got 6.12 kilowatts of DC, but we've only got a 5 kilowatt inverter. Now, the key thing with that is that the more power we can send down to that inverter throughout the daylight hours of the day, the more that inverter is going to generate. So even though it can never generate more than 5 kilowatt, which is its rating, if we can send 2 kilowatts down to that inverter when a standard system would maybe only send 1, then that property has got more power to play with. More power to send into the Eddy, which we've also installed on this job, more power to send into the electric vehicle, which the customer's got, and just more power to send into the lights, the sockets, the cooker, and everything else that we all use in our homes, especially if this home looks to go down the heat pump route in the future. So installing as many panels on the roof and having an inverter that is flexible enough to handle that amount of power is key, and that's another reason why we love the SolarEdge system. So as well as the solar PV inverter, the panels and the Eddy that we've installed in this job, we've actually also installed a SolarEdge Energy Modbus. Now that is a really cool piece of kit. With the free dashboard that customers get when they get SolarEdge, that dashboard without the Energy Modbus would just show you how much power you're generating. So it wouldn't show you where that power is going, as in if that power is going back to the grid, or if you're using that power and how much is going back to the grid or how much you're using. With the Energy Modbus, it shows you just that. So if you've consumed in your home 100 kilowatt hours, then the Energy Modbus will put onto that dashboard, out of that 100 kilowatt hours, how much power you've self-consumed by using the solar PV power and how much you've had to buy in from the grid. So that's really handy for people that aren't sure if they want to add more solar or not, because it will show you how you're using the current amount of solar PV that you've got. This system, obviously, we've already installed the solar and we've installed the maximum we can on this job, so it's more of a monitoring process for the customer, and also helps them possibly adjust their routines to try and use more of that power. So for example, turning their tumble dryer on during the day, or the washing machine on, or the dishwasher, rather than leaving those to go at night, turning them on during the day to try and use that solar power. Not only will the Energy Modbus show you that information, it'll actually show you information about how much power you've sent back to the grid. So in renewables, there's a massive great surge of people wanting battery storage, which is fantastic, and batteries are really, really good. However, there can be a bit of a commitment financially. So we're real, and we know that that is a stumbling block for some people. So the Energy Modbus will show you how much power you've exported today, yesterday, this month, this year, last year, so that if you said, right, I'm going to go for solar for now, which is literally the situation that this property is in, they weren't sure if to go for batteries or not, we said, well, let's install this Energy Modbus, and that will show you how much of the power you're using, how much you're exporting, and after a couple of years, that customer can look back, we can look back and see how they're using their solar power. If their solar power is all going back to the grid and they're struggling to use it during the day, then we say, well, a battery storage would be perfect. If, however, on the flip side of that, we look after a couple of years and there's hardly any power being exported back to the grid, or a very small percentage, then we say, look, you don't need to get a battery, you're already using pretty much all the power that you're generating. So that's why adding something as small as the Energy Modbus can really help you make better decisions in the future when it comes to adding more technology like batteries onto a system like this. So when this customer came to us about wanting a solar PV system, they mentioned that they had a hot water cylinder, which to a company like ours is absolute music to our ears, because instead of a hot water cylinder just being a thermal store of water to a lot of people, for us it's like a big water battery. We can put surplus solar PV power into that hot water cylinder when it's not being used in the home. And the customer was interested in the eddy. We've used the MyEnergy eddy, which will automatically divert any surplus power into that hot water cylinder up to 3 kilowatts, which is fantastic, and it's a real cost-saving system when you're looking at comparing an eddy with a battery. So it's kind of like the first step with getting a battery storage system, is actually turning your hot water cylinder into a thermal battery almost. So we've installed an eddy on this job, and the customer's now actually looking for a larger hot water cylinder to store more of that power, as he's got such an abundance of solar power that if he can store more of it as hot water, that'll help reduce his gas bills, or if you're on oil, your oil bills. In this case it's gas, but yeah, it's a fantastic piece of kit, and I'm going to show you exactly how we've fitted it. So we've got the rail on the roof now, and then we've got one optimizer per panel. So along the top we've got 9 panels, which means there's 9 optimizers, and then same again on the bottom row. Each one of these optimizers will allow each individual panel to work on its own. That will increase efficiency. It will allow each panel to work independently from each other, meaning that if this panel went faulty, the ones around it would continue to work to maximum efficiency. So I'll take you through what we've got on this system. So we've got the single phase SolarEdge inverter. So this is the setup version, which is the newest version, and this is a 5 kilowatt inverter. We've then got a DC isolator here. So the cables come down from the roof, from the panels, into this isolator, out the isolator, into the inverter. So this is just here as an isolation switch for if we ever need to maintain or turn off the system. Next we have the AC isolator. So this is pretty much the exact same device as the DC one. However, this isolates the AC side of the system. So the side of the system that is pushing the power back into your home so you can use the power. We've then got a generation meter. So this generation meter is logging all the units that this system is producing. So whether or not you use them, export them, do whatever with them, this is logging the total amount. So if the inverter gets changed because it's faulty or whatever, then this meter will continue to add up the amount of units that the home has produced in total. Moving down the board, we've then got the SolarEdge Modbus. So in here we've got the Energy Modbus that does all of the tracking with the amount of power the home has consumed, imported, exported, and puts all that onto the SolarEdge dashboard so the customer can see how they're using their solar power, and that's fed through this little Cat5 cable here. We've then got a switch fuse spur here, which fuses the SolarEdge Modbus down to 3 amps and provides a bit of local isolation if we need to reset or turn the Energy Modbus off. Here we have a Harvey. So this is part of the MyEnergy product range. This was actually installed already because the property already had a Zappi installed, but we've just taken it off and put it back onto our Fireboard here, which brings us to the Fireboard itself. So anyone that watches our Instagrams or any of our other social medias will see that we 9 times out of 10 fit a Fireboard to our systems. So not only does it give the wall a bit of protection if the inverter starts to heat up because it's generating a lot of power, it also gives us a nice backdrop to actually mount all of the products on. If we were to try and mount all the products on the brickwork it's very hard to get everything level and everything clipped securely. So we like to install these fireboards to make everything look neat and provide a bit of fire protection for the install as well. So then into all of this, we have a connection into our home consumer unit. So this consumer unit here, we've got a 32 amp supply which comes out of there into this energy Modbus, and then that connects through and into the rest of the system. So that powers everything, and that is the route back into the home for the solar power. So I'll go through now what we've got when we're installing an Eddy. So we've got the existing hot water cylinder, which as long as it's got an immersion heater, we can use a Myengi Eddy on it. We've then got the pre-existing circuit for the immersion heater, which has an isolation switch above. It then comes into the Myengi Eddy, and out of that Myengi Eddy goes into the immersion heater. So basically, the existing system that was there before the Eddy was installed was isolation switch directly into the immersion heater. All we've done with the Eddy is we've put the Eddy in line with the immersion heater. So we've got isolation switch, then the Eddy, and then the immersion heater. So there's no extensive wiring or anything like that. As long as we've got a working immersion heater and a working immersion circuit, we can quite easily install the Eddy. So now I'll show you what we've got on the Eddy screen. So this is the Myengi Eddy screen, and you can see here it shows us loads of information. So you can see just here we've got 3.2 kilowatts of solar PV production. So that is the SolarEdge inverter that we've got downstairs. We've then got a home consumption of 0.1 kilowatts, so a really low home consumption. We've then got a 2.7 kilowatt export back to the grid. So you can see all these figures are changing all the time. So we can actually see that today this 0.31 is the amount of kilowatt hours that has been sent into the tank to heat the tank up. You can also see that it says max temperature reached. So the cylinder is actually up to temperature currently. So the 0.31 kilowatt hours has basically topped the tank up, so it's up to 60 degrees now. But this is exactly what you would see on the Myengi app as well. It's a really clear display of what's happening with the solar, your home, the export or the import. We can see the arrows are pointing back to the grid, so we're exporting back to the grid, and you can see there that the solar is pointing into the house, so that means the solar is going into the property, and we've got 0.1 kilowatts being used inside the property. So if we were to put a kettle on or something like that, that would jump up to maybe 2.5 kilowatts, and then there'd be less power going back to the grid. So we can see with this sort of system that it's kind of turning your hot water cylinder into a large thermal water battery, if you like. It's only one way, you can't withdraw the power back out of it, but you can withdraw the hot water. So that means that instead of all of this power always going back to the grid if the home can't use it, we've got this thermal store of water that is heated up from power that the home isn't currently using, which is kind of like a halfway house between getting a battery system that will store the power as electricity and getting a thermal battery like what this is. So we can see that this is a really clear display, and the Eddy is such a clever device. It's actually my favourite device from Myenergi. It's so flexible, so we can actually install up to 2 heaters onto this Eddy. So if you had a dual immersion cylinder, or if you had 2 towel radiators, or if you had an immersion heater and the towel radiator, or underfloor heating and all sorts of different things, you can wire it into this Eddy, and that will then send the surplus power to the priority device, and then once the priority device is heated up, it will then send it to the second device. So it's a really flexible piece of kit, and it's kind of like a halfway house between an electrical battery storage system and not having anything. But yeah, really cool piece of kit and really flexible. So this is the SolarEdge monitoring dashboard that you get with the SolarEdge system. So I'll work down this. So we've got an install capacity of 6.12 kilowatts peak of panels. We can then see along this top bar here, this is our live readouts of what everything's doing. So we've got the solar panels, we've got 4.64 kilowatts. It's changing all the time, but roughly that being generated right now. So that is effectively what's coming out of the solar inverter. That's then pushed into the home, but the home is only using 0.26 kilowatts, so 250 watts now of power. So that means we've got a surplus of 4.13 kilowatts going back to the grid. So you can see there, that's indicated by this arrow pointing back to the grid. So if it was the other way around and the home needed power from the grid, then this arrow would be pointing the other way and it would show us how much power is being bought in from the grid. But at the minute, we are sending power back to the grid because we're generating just over 4 kilowatts, only using 250, and therefore we're sending 4.23 back to the grid. The next step down, we've got today we have produced 7.46 kilowatt hours. So that is just what we've generated from the solar today. This month we've generated just over 804 kilowatt hours of power. In its lifetime, this system has produced 1.42 megawatt hours, so 1,420 kilowatt hours of power. So scrolling down, we're on this part here, which is my favorite part really. We're on the day tab, so here we can see what the system has produced today. So today this system has produced 7.48 kilowatt hours. Of that 7.48 kilowatt hours, 25% of that power, so 1.89 kilowatt hours, has been self-consumed, so has been used in the home. So either with the eddy charging the hot water cylinder, with the home using the appliances, however it's been done, the home has used 25% of whatever the property has generated from its solar today. That's left 75% export back to the grid, so that's 5.59 kilowatt hours of export today. This next part is your consumption, so that is no matter if the property has used that from the solar or from buying it in from the grid, that is literally what the home has used. So today the home has used just short of 3 kilowatt hours so far. 63% of that 3 kilowatt hours has come from the solar. So that is the exact same reading here. So 1.89 kilowatt hours has been self-consumed from the solar, and that's led to a 1.1 kilowatt hour import from the grid. So those numbers are fairly small. If we were to go, you can see all of this through the week, month and year. Obviously the year will give us a better overview of how the system performs each month. So obviously some months, like the summer months, are better for solar production than the winter months like November, December. So with this yearly tab, after 12 months, we'll be able to see how the system performs through all of the seasons and all of the months. So this is saying that out of the yearly generation of 1.39 megawatt hours of system production, the home has self-consumed 0.49 megawatt hours of power. That's led to an export of 0.9 megawatt hours going back to the grid. So you can see that that's represented by the 65% export. So effectively 65% of everything that the home has generated has gone back to the grid in this property's case so far. And 35% has been self-consumed this year so far. Then we've got the consumption reading, so 683.49 kilowatt hours of consumption this year this home has used. 72% of that 683 has been self-consumed, so 491.82 kilowatt hours has been self-consumed, and the property this year so far has had to buy in 191.67 kilowatt hours. So you can see they've self-consumed a hell of a lot of power compared to what they've had to buy in. And that's represented on the chart here. So we've got 72% of this year's consumption has been used from the solar, so it's been self-consumed, and they've only had to buy in 28% of their yearly power so far. We then move down and we've got the months of the year and then what's been happening. So production is represented in green, you've then got your consumption is represented in red, and your self-consumption is represented in blue, and then you've got your kilowatt hours up the side. And this changes depending on what tab we're on. So this is the month tab, so here you can see the days of the month and the kilowatt hours up the side. So there's an absolute wealth of information on this, and it really helps us as installers and designers really work out if things like additional solar are a good option, or battery storage or option, or if a larger hot water cylinder is a good option. This gives us so much information as to the amount of power that this home produces, but importantly, how much it sends back to the grid each year. Because if this here was at 10% or 20%, then there may be a case for a battery storage system, but it wouldn't have to be an absolutely massive battery storage system. It could be quite a small one. Whereas this, so far, we've got a 65% export back to the grid. So that shows us that there would be a case if the budgets were there to install the battery storage system on this system. But we've got a lot of the year left. This system's not been installed for too long, so we won't be pushing for any sort of decision, to be honest, on a battery storage system or anything else for 12 months. And it's always going to be the customer's decision. So it just gives us a really well-rounded graph of what is happening in the system and in the household. So if we scroll down from there, we then see this comparative energy. So we've got month, quarter and year. So this is showing us what we've generated this year. So as the years go on, these will be different. There'll be different coloured bars on here that represent different years. So we'll have, maybe next year we'll have a red set of bars that represent 2022, then maybe a blue one that represents 2023, and it'll move along so you can compare each month how much power your system has generated, which is really cool. And then if we go to quarter, so this will show us the individual quarters throughout the different years. As the years go on, how much power the system has produced. So you'll be able to compare year by year how your system is performing. Now, one of the main things that SolarEdge is kind of made famous for is its ability to allow each panel to work individually and the monitoring that comes with that. So here we can see we've got all the panels on the roof here, and then we've got the amount that each panel has produced on the daily tab, so today. So if we just change that to yearly, we can then see how much power each panel has produced this year so far. So they're all around about, well, between 79 and 82 kilowatt hours this year. They will all vary slightly. We're not expecting to see these to being absolutely the same all year round, because there's, some panels might be slightly dirtier than others, or the light might fall differently on some of the panels, or the tolerances within the panels might be different. So that sort of range there is very much acceptable for what we see day in, day out. You can see this one here is a slightly darker blue. That's because this one has produced less than the rest of them. You can see they're all 79, 80 and 83. This one's at 70, and the reason for that is there's a really small soil stack that sticks up through the roof, and so that is actually casting a bit of a shadow on this panel, which is then causing that one to underperform. So if this wasn't SolarEdge, then that bit of shading would affect the string of panels. So if this wasn't SolarEdge, we would probably wire this in two strings. So you'd have one string of panels up here and a second string of panels down here. And that's particularly for this reason, that if you get shading on one panel, it'll affect the string. So with that in mind, you can see it's actually only affected this one panel rather than this full bank of panels here that it may have done if it was a standard non-SolarEdge system. So that for me just proves that SolarEdge is well worth the money. With this, like I say, we can change this yearly total. So as the years go on, this will change to just log absolutely everything each panel has produced. We can then click on the panel. On the desktop version, we can see even more information than this, but we can see the amount of power, the optimizer voltage, the amount of current, the voltage coming out of the panel, the manufacturer, the model, what the panel address is, the serial number of the optimizer, pitch, the orientation, so we can see we're pretty much bang on south. So we see loads of information, and on the installer side of this, we can then delve even deeper into those figures to try and do some remote fault finding, which is absolutely, it's like the installer's biggest tool, because if you can imagine, if this customer thought that some of these panels weren't working correctly, we may have to set a full scaffold back up and actually start taking panels off the roof and voltage checking them and checking the status of the connections and everything at quite a cost to the customer. With a system like this, we can simply go onto the panel or the set of panels that the customer thinks isn't working correctly and do some voltage checks remotely. We can actually then, on the desktop version, compare panel to panel to see what the output voltage of the optimizer is, what the output voltage of the panels are, and create a graph to compare all of the panels together if we want. If that showed that this panel here was faulty, then we can submit that graph to Trina and go, under the terms of the warranty, the product and the performance warranty, you owe us another panel because that panel is only producing 50% of what it should be. That is all done remotely. So then when we actually receive that panel and we get approval that we can change it, that's when we set the scaffolding up, and that's when we go onto the roof to do some work. So you can see that that would save time and money, and also it may involve us not having set a full scaffold up to cover all the roof. Because if we've just got set a tower scaffold up to cover this one panel, then that is a much cheaper option than having to set a full scaffolding up. And there's no way to know that on a standard system as to which panel is faulty without going up and testing each panel individually. So this gives us a heads up, remote fault finding, and can actually generate a report for us to send to the panel manufacturer to claim on a replacement panel. So I hope you've enjoyed this video on our latest project here in York. If you've got any questions about anything you've seen on this job or any of the other jobs that we've done, please feel free to ask any questions and we'll be happy to help.